I have been wanting for some time to share the story of Mrs. Chepa Franco, a Papago Indian from the San Javier Reservation. Today, the Papagos are called Tohono or Odham, but my mind still thinks Papago, as I have, with my wife, left that area over 40 years ago when it was still called Papago. The year was 1975. We have been married 1 year, Paul and I. We have lived in New Jersey, and we traveled to Tucson, Arizona, and eventually to South Tucson, Arizona, where rent was much cheaper, to be able to go to college. It was much cheaper to go to college in Arizona than it was, let's say, New Jersey, Rutgers, and what have you. So we moved there and we established our residence in Arizona so that tuition would cost us next to nothing. So while we were there waiting for school, let's say, to begin, we became very much involved with the Indian Teaching Committee, and we taught on the reservation closest to Tucson, which is just a few miles south of South Tucson, where San Javier was. And one Sunday, I remember we had friends, Art and Star, forgot the last name, and a girl who lived with them called Cheryl. And we drove in that Volkswagen van of Art's into the Papago Reservation. And we drove around trying to get inspiration while we all repeated Allah Abha, Allah Abha, Allah Abha. And we saw a sign, like a picket on the ground that said art and crafts and an arrow. I said, let's go there. Being an artist, I was attracted to art, of course. So we drove there, and we arrived at this house. Poor looking house, but large. There's all kind of abandoned, broken, and trashy things everywhere in the yards. We knocked on the door, and we heard a voice, "Come in." We walked in there. It was a large room. The rug on the floor was so dusty, I think it was the dust that held it together. And on the right, seated on the bed, was an elderly woman with very enlarged calves. And we looked at her, and she says, "What do you want?" And I said, "We saw a sign that said art and crafts on the roads." And she goes, "Over there." So we went in the direction of her chin, and on a shelf we saw a few, I don't want to call them kachinas, not to offend the Hopis, but there were some sculptures made of Ochoa wood, and some mesquite maybe, and very, very rudimental, looking like 18th century, 19th century Indian figurines with bags or baskets on their back. Very rudimental, very primitive looking. And it was really not something I would put in my living room, okay? Nor would buy. And she probably saw my disappointment in my eyes. And she said, "You're not buying?" And I said, "Alas, no, we're students in school and we don't have much money. But we came to talk to you about the Baha'i faith. Are you a religious person?" "I'm Catholic." "Yeah, I know. Everybody's Catholic here. There's a big church, the San Javier Church." "I'm Catholic," she says. And again, she pulled up her chin toward the chimney, direction of the chimney, which geographically must have been the direction where San Javier del Bac Church used to be, or is. And she goes, "That's my church over there." Very calmly, I said to her, "Yes, of course. But your ancestors, what religions did they practice? I'm Catholic, she answered. I understand. I understand. But the old way, your family, your ancestor, your parents, your grandparents, what religions were they? She looked sideways at me and she says, you want to know? I said, yes, I do. Come next Sunday, I tell you. Okay, now go. We left. And we asked ourselves as we were leaving, you think she will tell us next week? I don't know. Let's see. So we drove home we lived in South Tucson, and Art and Star lived on the outskirts of Tucson. And in those days, in 1975, we kept our hair longer. We wore sort of like dashiki looking shirts, sandals, and maybe bead necklaces. You remember that time, the hippie era, the end of the hippie era. And I made myself a necklace with 95 beads. And going to work, I wore it under my shirt and tie. Whenever I had time, I would recite 95 times Allah Abha. Allah Abha, for those who don't know, means God is the most glorious. It's a very short prayer, and it's also a greeting among Baha'is. So by saying this prayer, I was asking God to help me in case we go back on Sunday and Mrs. Franco will tell us of the old religion. Please make me understand. I know that the old Indian religion are very animistic. There is many figures that are mixed with animals and birds and fish and the sky and the moon and the mountains. And I was afraid I would not understand the relationship between all these folkloric images and the divine. So I kept praying. Whenever I had time, I prayed. When I got home, I would pray 5 or 6 times in the morning, go into work while I'm driving the car, and I would be pulling my beads. I was driving the car and all that. So all through the week, I have prayed to truly understand in case she would tell us the story. Came Sunday. We were to go back. Art and Star could not come. Cheryl came, and we drove to Mrs. Franco's house. We knocked on the door. Come in. We walked in there, and Mrs. Franco looked sideways and said, it's you. You came back. We said, yes, you invited us. Yeah. At that time, she was sitting in her wheelchair, giving us sideways her back, and she was facing the chimney. The chimney was not lit. It was summer. And she said, sit down. Well, there was no chairs, okay? So we sat on the dusted rug, wondering, well, there was no little animal or critters, but it was very dusty. So we all three sat on the ground, and I pulled my beads, and I started counting my Allah Abha in silence until she would speak. And she said, what do you want? I said, last week you promised us you would tell us of the old ways. You would tell us of the religion of your parents. Oh, I did. Okay. And she looked again at the wall toward the direction of the church. And she says, when I was a little girl, my father took me to the mountain. We immediately understood which mountain she referred to, because the holy mountain of the Papago is called Babrakivri, which is on the road between Cels and San Javier. When you take the road to go to the main Indian reservation, on the right side, on the area not far from where the mountain of the the peak where the big observatory is a mountain called Babra Kivri. So we know she was referring to the mountain. But as a little girl with her father going to Babra Kivri made no sense. Babra Kivri looked almost like a jack. It was elevated that way and then sharp going up, very high, maybe 15 stories high, and then a flat plateau on top. What did she mean by going with her father at the mountain? Well, probably at the foot of the mountain. And then she continued. And when you get to the top of the mountain, how old were you, Mrs. Franco? I was 5. 5-year-old climbing a straight mountain? Made no sense. So, when you get to the top of the mountain, you see there is a cave, a very small opening of the cave, too small to get inside. At that moment, all three of us kept silence, okay? Paul, Cheryl, and I were completely silent, and we were all saying silent prayers to try to understand what the heck is she talking about, a 5-year-old going to the top of the mountain. Let's try to understand. So you get in front of that opening. It is so small, so tiny. And you look at it, and you cannot go inside. So you close your eyes, and you make a full turn of yourself, and you look at the opening, and it is big opening. Then you go inside. When you go inside, you look by the door, there is a flat rock. This is where Iitoy sleeps. That's where Iitoy sleeps. There is a shelf at the end of it. You can see the komal. You can see the stone where he grinds the corn. You can see the fire where he burns the wood, the mesquite wood. And then on the wall over there, you see his arrows and his bow. And you look around more, and there is a nail there, an empty nail. Then you continue turning, and you see the opening of the cave become small again. Too small to go out. So you close your eyes. You make a full turn of yourself. You remove the beads that you have around your neck, and you hang them on that nail. And the door is open again, and you can go out. She went into silence. I looked at Paul. Paul looked at me and Cheryl. We have not understood what she was talking about. And all of a sudden, I started to talk, as if pushed by an invisible voice. And I said, Mrs. Franco, your father made sure to teach you of the old ways. So he took you to the innermost sacred spot of Iitoy, the prophet of the Papagos. Now you get to the end to enter the sanctuary on that pilgrimage. Who are you to enter that holy spot? Are you worthy to enter therein? So you make a full turn of your consciousness, and you reflect upon your sins and your good deeds. And when you are ready, the door is open to receive you. You walk in there. It is not a fancy place. There's no gold and fancy and jewels into the holy sanctuary of the prophet. A simple flat rock bed. The only thing he eats is probably corn and whatever he can catch with his arrows, whatever birds he can kill or animal or rabbits he can eat. That's all he has. He doesn't have earthly possessions. But that nail there, that's empty nail. Okay, forget about that nail. We'll get to that later. Then you turn around and you're ready to leave. No, you cannot leave. You have to now be worthy of that entrance. You have to be worthy of having attained to the holy precinct of Iitoy. You have to prove that you are worthy. So you sacrifice something of yourself. Since the only thing you have is your necklace, you offer it to him. Then the door is open and you can go out again. Then I stopped talking, amazed at what came out of my mouth. And I was searching for her look. She didn't look at me, she gave me her back. And I said, Mrs. Franco? Silence. Mrs. Franco? Am I close to understanding the story? No words. I got up and I went all the way in front of her and I looked at her. She was crying. Then she looked up to me and she stretched her arm toward my face and held my face, and she said to me, "You are my son." And we both cried.